There we go. Thank you, whoever that was. Yeah, welcome to the Kuadrant community call. So a few items here in the agenda. I've pulled most of the stuff from the backlog. A couple of things were added more recently. And once we get through those, we can look and see if there's anything else we want to shout about. So first thing I wanted to do was just give out a shout to some work that Dave Martin has been doing in Gateway API community with the metrics, around metrics, the Gateway API metrics. So we did a demo with that last week. I think some people were there for that here. And since that, it looks like Envoy Proxy has put out a blog post or some kind of post around using that with Envoy. So that's pretty cool. Pretty cool to see that being used and referenced by other projects. Nice one. Okay. So next is the MVP release check-in. So service protection version and the stable channel. So I know there's work going on with this, so I just wanted to check in with that. Suppose how far away do we think we are from a stable channel being available through Operator Hub? Anybody?
Okay, I'm chime in. I think the work for it is done. It's just we need to push something there.
Up to Operator, to the Operator Hub repo, is it? I'm not sure how that works, but is it?
Yeah,
like
I don't know either. It's just
I'm gonna do a quick intercept here, and that is if we want to push it to Operator Hub, I will require that it goes through us first, even if it's only for the one component, because that's official. If it's on Operator Hub, it is released. That's currently the way it is. So once they did a build, we will take a few days to actually test it, and then it can be uploaded to Operator Hub.
Okay, this is a community release, though. You know that, right?
Right.
Yeah,
we did it for the previous one. If we don't push it to Operator Hub, I'm fine because it's not released anywhere. Right. If we do just the catalog source with the stable channel in mind, I'm fine with it going through us with the entire thing. But if it's going, it is actually released, meaning it's an Operator Hub, it's for everybody to download, I would like to test it first before we do that. Meaning, please produce a catalog source that has the stable. We can test. We can use that, but you push it to Operator Hub only once it's all done.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Well, I can imagine
Okay.
we never decided this really. Like, what do we do? I mean, I don't necessarily disagree or agree with it. I just like in my head it was like, okay, this is upstream release that's not needed, but there might be a good story around that. Yes, we do want that because we want to make sure that what we ship upstream is has been tested.
Yeah. I'm not questioning the value of it. It's more, I guess, I hadn't expected that gate.
No, me neither. Exactly.
So okay, so I don't think it's unreasonable to test it, but Peter, you're gonna have to do that twice now, right? So instead, I guess.
Yeah, I would like to ask why we need it in Operator Hub first, and then do the MVP.
I don't know. Right, I don't know that we need it in Operator Hub first. It's just where I assumed it was coming from.
Okay.
Because that's where the subscription is pointing right now. When MGC installs Kuadrant onto a Spoke cluster, it points at Operator Hub. So I think we can work around that by creating a catalog source that points at the Kuadrant repo, and
I think if we can do that hack on our testing clusters, basically.
Yeah.
I think it's fine, and we should do that. We should just do the hack only for the one testing deployment, and once it's in entirety tested, then we can upload to Operator Hub and then just check that the uploaded version works afterwards.
Yeah, and I guess it sort of modifies the release process a little bit as well. So maybe if I explain in my head and what I put in the doc, right, in the release and testing doc. So we were going to create a release branch. That branch has a subscription resource that would be pointing at the release channel. So in order to, we would need to make a change basically, because in order to test that release branch with an unreleased version of the Kuadrant service protection, we will need a different catalog source. So that means once we finish testing, so if we finish testing and we're happy, then I'm just saying it out loud, Petter, just so that I fully kind of grasp how it's going to work. Then we would need to, so we finish testing, then we release Kuadrant to the Operator Hub, and we would then need to update the subscription on the release branch of MGC to point to Operator Hub, and then tag the release at that point.
Right. Why are we creating subscriptions manually? I think I'm missing that part. Because usually
we're not creating it manually. There is a resource that is used by the add-on manager in the hub to install the Kuadrant, and it creates the subscription.
Okay, right. I'm gonna check. Right, basically, can we make that? Can we leave that in release branch, pointing to the Operator Hub image, but change it manually on our deployed clusters?
Not very easily, because it's actually embedded. So we use the add-on SDK from OCM, and that embeds the resources into Go with the Go embed FS.
Right.
Do you follow me?
Right. Okay. So basically, OCM is responsible for creating those. We cannot easily change it. Only thing we could do is change it on the spokes themselves. Is that correct?
Yeah. Well, it probably get reconciled back by like the work manager from OCM would probably reconcile it back to what it's supposed to be. Okay, so I've got an idea, right? It's a relatively simple change, I think. We could probably have an mvar that would set the catalog source in the subscription in the add-on manager that could be overridden at test time, but it would default to the Operator Hub. We could probably do something like that.
Yeah, that sounds like a best idea for me. We can easily use it for testing, and then we do it as we do with actually released products, meaning we still have to verify that it installs after it is on Operator Hub.
Okay. All right. So, right, I'll create an issue to do that.
Yeah.
So then, what we need from BD is the image we should use from the Kuadrant repo in Quay, so that we can point to it, right?
Also, sorry, I intercepted this slide. I wasn't aware that we are going to release to Operator Hub before. That information completely slipped past me.
So I'm going to allow the operator catalog to be specified or mvar. Can fix that relatively quickly, so that's not a big deal. Okay. So the other point that I wanted to, we got totally sidetracked there. Alex, Alex Ortidi was saying there's some stuff remaining. So I'm not sure if I caught, when are we expecting this image to be, I guess, not in Operator Hub anymore, but is it already in Quay now?
Sorry, Didi, can you take that one? I get a phone call. Absolutely needs to take it. Sorry.
I think Didi just said I'll be right back, so he's not there.
Maybe I can help there. Once it's merged to main, then it's automatically it goes. I mean, not necessarily to main. Every branch gets an image and push it to Kuadrant. One thing that I think it changed recently was that for release branches, maybe, or for branches that are not the main branch, that process now is manually triggered. If I'm not mistaken, but it should be just the push of a button.
Okay, so once we have that image, I guess DD or somebody let us know on Slack that that image is there, and then we can update our catalog source and the image ref to point to that.
I was away from keyboard and I'm just back, and I just hear my name.
So DD, we're not going to use the operator hub for testing.
Okay.
We're going to change our catalog source for the subscription to point directly at the image in key. I can never say it. Sorry. And I would. The first question was, is that image already there? And if it's not there, once it's there, could you ping us and let us know so that we can then update our catalog source?
Definitely, yeah. So at the moment, we have like all the mechanism to create the right catalogs and with the right channels as well as bundles. The thing is actually for releasing the operator, we need to release first the operands. In our case, it would be Limitador and Authorino. And at least I can speak for Limitador.
Yeah, well, Authorino, sorry, yeah, I was about to say, Guy, correct me if I'm wrong, but Authorino is fine because we're targeting 011, right, for this one. So we just need to walk up the Limitador branch up.
Yeah. And I think like Limitador is going to be probably tomorrow.
Okay. And Limitador, is that released to Operator Hub, and is that where that's installed from?
So the Limitador operator that is going to be in Operator Hub eventually, most probably we're going to have like before the release to have the catalog source to.
Okay.
It's going to be definitely on Key.io, but it's not going to be published in Operator Hub until we decide so, basically. Until anyone says like, okay, it's good to go, it's green, like no QE or, and then we can actually put it in Operator Hub.
So I'm just thinking, okay, so that catalog source that we point at, that's going to have all the bundle images that we need in order to install at that point then. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's okay. Yeah. Okay, that sounds like it'll work. So the only thing we need to do is be able to specify which catalog source. So we'll get a fix on the go for that. All right. Thomas.
Yeah, just an innocent question. Because in my head, productization and QE is part of what Red Hat does when they ship something to customers, like the extra value. That's what you pay a subscription partly for, and the support that you get. Is that not true? I don't know how does Red Hat do other open source projects? There's also just they don't ship anything upstream before it passes QE. I'm just genuinely interested.
I would say that that's not the case in my experience, but I don't know for sure on all projects.
I don't think there is any standard for open source projects, or I don't think there is a standard for upstream first in Red Hat. Like I think Red Hat doesn't do upstream things like in unison, and every team does it their way.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think like in this case, it's not a serious blocker anyway, because we can work around that. So
Yeah,
my fear would be if it would slow us down. Right?
I don't.
Yeah, it should not.
I don't think it will slow us down. Yeah, it's one change that we need to make, but it's a relatively small change.
Yeah, if it was a significant slowdown, we would be happy to compromise, but yeah, right now it's not needed, so we would rather not.
Okay, so once we got that change done, I guess at that point, MGC, we will. So I'm going to credit Mike with this idea. So rather than actually create the release branch at that point, we're just going to freeze main, and we will test from main, which will effectively be what will become the release branch once the Auth stuff is there. So the only things that will be able to go to main of MGC will be bug fixes. Once we've done our first pass of testing and auth policy v2 is present in the catalog, then and by our quadrants, then we'll create the RC branch at that point. So that avoids like going through additional. The release process on MGC is very lightweight. There's no bunches of catalogs and things like that to update. So yeah, we're going to try and go with that approach where we just freeze main. Main will only be open for bug fixes initially. Any thoughts on that one? Just trying to simplify things, really. So it's a point in time. Why not? Okay, so the last thing on this on MVP is myself and Phil Brooks have created a number of test case issues for MGC around DNS policy, TLS policy, based on the doc that I shared. We need the test cases for auth policy and relevant policy to also be created. I'm not sure if they've been done yet.
Yeah, I don't think we need that much of them because most of the auth policy is automated, and we plan on using that. So that should resolve most of it. RLP is only a bit are automated, but we will still handle those. So we can theoretically create those test cases. We expect that the auth policy and RLP testing will fall mostly to us. Okay. But we don't need test cases for ourselves right now. We don't need them written up. But if you want, we can probably create them for you. However, basically transcribing what we have in tests into a doc, I don't think that's a good idea.
No, I don't need to do that. No, but I guess, so we don't have everything, in MGC, we don't have everything automated.
Yeah.
So these test cases are initially manual test cases, but what is useful about transcribing them into issues, in my opinion, is it forces you to kind of go through the steps required in order to actually get to that point, which means now how to automate that is very well described in the issue.
Oh yeah,
because
that's worth it. Yeah, I would say, but yeah, that doesn't really matter. Yeah, I would say if you agree to let us both handle auth policy and RLP, I don't think we will need an additional test cases. However, if you want them, we can do it. We can do them. It just they will not help us in any way, I would say, currently. I mean us as a QE, that not anyone else.
So what about, like, is there any value in getting some of the engineering team to perform some of this testing instead of it all fall into QE around things that are not automated? Right.
It would be, but the amount of things we would like to test for RLP are not that. We don't have that many cases that we would like to test manually for RLP and for auth policy as well. Meaning we can easily just take all of the cases ourselves, and we won't require help with that. If you want, sure, definitely we can find something, but for simplifying things, we can do them. We can do that ourselves.
Okay, so let me ask this then. Be quick to ask for help if we're being delayed.
100%.
And we have engineers here who want to get this release out. So if they can help in any way with the testing, like, reach out quickly and we'll be more than happy to get involved.
100%. Like we discussed before, I will happily handle out most of the MGC testing to you for now, as we don't have a good coverage for it yet. But for those things, we've been working with them a long time, and we know them. So I think that should be fine. Also, my timelines for the testing are currently, I think, a week should suffice.
Okay.
Like if we have built Monday morning, I think by Friday evening we will be we will be completed with both auth policy and RLP and running automatic test against it.
Okay, that's good. I would probably anticipate roughly the same for MGC, but we've never been through it before, so it's hard to say for sure. No doubt we'll find some bug or two that we'll need to fix. That might.
Oh yeah, definitely. That's what I counted. Was of course like happy path, like the build actually works, right? We don't encounter a blocking issue by Wednesday or whatever, right? But
yeah. Okay. All right. Is there anything else on this? Okay, so we're pretty close to be able to start some testing, at least from the MGC side. Then, as soon as we get the catalog image and I make the change to the add-on manager. All right, I'll move on from that. Jason.
Yeah, this will probably be quick. Just an FYI, Oktoberfest is coming up. We probably want to make a call as to whether we want to participate or not. I think last year we did topic some of our repos and stuff with Oktoberfest label, but I don't think we did a huge amount of effort on, sort of priming a backlog, whatever. So if we do want to get involved, yeah, be a good time to take a look at backlogs and label some stuff Oktoberfest.
Cool.
Yeah, that is it. It's a bit earlier this year as well. I think it's starting like a week before.
Is there any guidelines to like how you should structure issues or things like what you should have in place to get the best engagement for that?
Yeah, there's some in the participation guide that's linked off the homepage there. There's also some good strategies for dealing with like spam and stuff maybe that we don't want to have to deal with as well. Like that tends to be a good time of year where people are looking for t-shirts and they're just raising PRs that are useless and stuff. So there's some strategies for dealing with that too. You can kick people out and you can get them banned.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Has anyone got an interest in actually taking the lead on creating a couple of issues for Oktoberfest?
I'm just going to create some anyway, but if anybody else wants to pitch in or wants to label stuff in other repos, feel free.
Okay. Perfect. Thanks, Jason. Aguski, define how Kuadrant lets the user configure some of the underlying services.
Thanks, Greg. I raised this issue here because I was writing a RFC for that, and I have the feeling that I reach a dead end. So I wanted to have a little, hopefully not long, discussion and see how if I can have some feedback on if I need to proceed or maybe close it and invest in approaches, in alternative approaches. Let me share the screen, please. So it's. Can I?
Yeah, go for it. Go for it. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Present. Enter screen. Should be good. Not this one. Okay. So just for some context, this is about regarding the Kuadrant protection. The data plane, instead of having the Kuadrant operator deploying all the services providing the protection, I'm referring obviously to Limitador and Authorino. Instead of that, a way of saying, hey, Kuadrant, this is my Authorino, I own this Authorino, or I manage this Authorino, same for Limitador. I lend that to you so you can use it on your behalf and let's in a shared way. So so I start working on a proposal, which it's a draft. It's more or less, you can have a look what it looks like. But high level, the idea, it's an obvious idea, or maybe naive, as you say, is Kuadrant. In the Kuadrant spec, I tell Kuadrant, hey, take this Authorino, take this limiter reference, and use it for your own needs. It looks good. So I was elaborating more the idea, and with the Authorino, it seems to be feasible. But with Limitador, I think I hit a wall, and that I wanted to discuss, because maybe it's best to close this early and go with something else. And by something else, one of there are two alternatives. One of them could be something that Jim is already working on it. Maybe I can give him the word later. So the idea is when using my own limitador, I deploy Kuadrant and I say, hey, use this limitador instance. The problem, this is the limitador structure. The limitador structure in the same CRT. There are two sections that we could define. One is for deploying, and the other is for configuring the service. And deploying, I mean this. I'm talking about the storage. I'm talking about the image being used. I'm talking about things like array limiting headers, things related to the listeners, port number, things like that. This is pretty much deployment configuration options. And the other is limits. And limits is what, once limitador is up and running, things we inject as a configuration in a file, and then you define more or less what are the array limits for specific conditions and variables, and for the different time windows. So the thing is that if limitador instance is shared by some third party and it's owned by a third party, the third party will manage the deployment, will decide the storage, will decide on everything on the deployment configuration, and will leave the limits to be injected by Kuadrant operator, by the Kuadrant control plane. And that's where I think we have an issue. So the limits would be, here is an example. Some limits will be managed by a third party, and some other limits in the same CR, in the same Kubernetes resource, will be managed by Kuadrant. So first issue we need to address is we need a way to define or to label those limits in limitador CR, which is already a challenge. And then the second thing I can think about is an impact on security issues. Things like I'm adding some limits to a third-party owned custom resource. From the Kuadrant perspective, I'm adding limits to a third-party custom resource, so why not that one can change my limits? I could implement something to revert the changes, things like that, but it's not owned by Kuadrant. So that's the thing. Having a single resource being managed by two different, or at least two different parties, and that has implications and issues. For instance, somebody wants to manage those custom resources using some GitOps. You cannot, because there are different sources to the same resource, things like that. So I don't think this is a good idea. So that brings the alternatives. And before going to alternatives, I would like to ask if you see any reason why limitador instance should be shared. If anybody has something that I'm missing, I would like to hear. And where it seems to be a clear use case for Kuadrant multi-cluster and a clear a clear feature that adds value, it's I want my limitador's counters, not the instance of limitador, the limitador service, but the counters to be shared thing. So I have my counters. You can use, when I say counters, I'm referring to backend. In the end, it's backend. So I want my backend to be shared. So my counters could be used by different limitador instances. That's I think everybody agrees, and that's a valid use case. But so sharing backend, so sharing counters, it's a good thing or a wanted thing. On the other hand, sharing the instance, I don't see a value for it. I only see issues. So if anybody has an idea or something that I'm missing, it would be nice to have this. So, yes, question. Maybe it's time to questions or something. Yeah, before I go to two alternatives I think of that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I understood it. I think I have.
Sure.
So it's not about sharing the backend store, as in like when you say backend, you mean like if it was like a Redis or something like that? Is that when you say backend, you mean that? Okay, so there is clear value in sharing that because obviously shared counters are useful.
Yes.
And the difficulty is having two different components configure the same instance of limitador.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't see a lot of value. I don't see a lot of value in that. I see a lot of headache.
Yeah,
like
by itself, the limitador instance doesn't require much resources, and this can be, we can argue on that depending on the workload, but the required resources by limitador, I mean, there is no much in having multiple limitador instances.
Right.
It's more interesting part is the interesting from the point of view of maintaining that is the counters. I mean, I want to maybe back up them or keep them in a different storage or whatever. But yeah,
what does this stop you from doing? Right, like if you don't have this ability to share an instance of limitador, is it just the case that means you have to deploy more instances of limitador if you want more than one? Is that the main value?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The thing is that this doesn't happen with Authorino, and it doesn't happen because there is a clear separation on the deployment configuration and on the configuration of the service. The deployment of the configuration is done using Authorino CRD, and the configuration of the Authorino is done using the authconfig CRD. And I don't want to go into details, but for maybe it's interesting to you, for the audience to know that in the beginning of the limitador as a Kubernetes service, in the beginning, there were two CRDs. There was a limitador CR, so you deploy limitador, and then they were rate limits, I think they were called rate limits CRDs for configuring limitador. I don't want to go into detail, but after some discussions, we end up having same CRD, single CRD for configuring both things.
Okay.
So because I don't want to go into, but that's how it is now. So then we go to the alternatives. What can we do? One is there are two clear, two alternatives I can think of. One is in the Kuadrant CR. This is the one that Jim is working. He can give more details, but in the Kuadrant CR, at least for Limitador, I'm not talking about Authorino. For the Authorino, we can still keep on the design. I still need to elaborate more, but I want to focus on Limitador. Instead of, that's one alternative. Instead of giving a reference to a Limitador instance, so a Limitador CR, give the storage option, the storage configuration, or the deployment configuration, let's say like this. So Kuadrant will deploy its own Limitador using that deployment configuration. And that deployment configuration, of course, could be a Redis connection string. So deploy a Limitador using this Redis, so you can have shared counters. And the other alternative would be break this CRD, the Limitador CRD, into two different CRDs, one for deployment options and the other for limits. Go back to not exactly the same design of the CRDs, but something that looks like more than we had before. There are pros and cons on both, but yeah, I don't want to go further. If anybody has some clear idea on how we should be doing this, or any idea, I will give it to the work. Yeah. Just before I give the word to Didi, I tend to think that we should, instead of breaking the CRD and having two CRDs, I think we should try the approach of providing to Kuadrant the deployment configurations of Limitador, and Kuadrant will deploy its own Limitador instance using but this is my idea, the best approach. But yeah, Didi.
Yeah, I think like we can agree on the everything that the directives for the deployment, they're like needed, of course. And when you mention in particular the shared counters, I think given the options that you did and the examples that you gave us, it's basically only for Redis. And at the time being, of course, we don't have any other way of sharing counters. Not sure if
exactly. I mean, currently Limitador has three, I would say four, let's say three and plus one, let's say like this, which is memory, Redis, disk, the latest one, and the plus one is infinite span. But I say plus one because by default it's not enabled. We need a custom build to have infinite span. So it's Redis, memory, or disk. Memory and disk cannot be shared. So it's only about Redis.
Well, it cannot be shared at the time being, of course. It's not. It's not. I was feeling like when you were actually thinking about the directives to configure the deployment of Limitador and all the particularities, that when you say like the shared counters or storage or replica and stuff, it's actually all about the deployment. And you were thinking on defining that CRD just to apply for all the things related to that deployment of Limitador, how it's going to be deploying the service, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's a kind of template. I mean, use this template for deploying your own Limitador. You will manage Limitador. All the configuration in that Limitador CR will only come from the Kuadrant operator. Yeah.
Well, I think, Authorino, it's of course is like different, and probably it would be valuable to align to that. You know, like we have like this way of configuring our services, you know, and then the service itself is configured. Like we have like a separate CR for that.
The main difference here is, for anyone that doesn't know, is that Authorino is itself a Kubernetes controller, while Limitador is not. Limitador configuration comes from a config file, like it's an like all the style, let's say like this, all the style. All the style doesn't mean bad style or wrong style, but it's a configuration file. So in the Kubernetes world, we create a config map with that configuration file.
Well,
So,
we're talking about like using limiter operator for that anyways, no?
no.
Not just a limiter by itself.
No, I'd say a limiter operator. Yeah, I do. I do see. Yeah. Sure.
Limiter is going to stay the same regardless.
Yes.
Simple
Exactly.
as it is. Well, I find value on having this. Of course, we need a way to give more options in the way that how it's going to be deployed in the Kubernetes world. So at the moment, we don't have that. We need to do like many hacky ways. And regarding of the separation of if we need to have like everything merged in the same CR or not, well, we can start like in the same one, and then if we see like it's actually a bit troublesome and bloated having just one CRD, we just split it in two and we go back to a similar way that we had it before.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not advocating for having Limitador as a Kuadrant controller. No, by all means, no.
Using limiter operator for that.
Exactly. I mean, it's limiter operator, the one that should take the ownership of taking all the configuration that lives in Kubernetes, in resources, right, and compile a configuration file and give it to Limitador. Just to be clear, I'm not saying that Limitador should be moving to Authorino's model for configuring.
No, of course, I would be against that. I mean, Limitador, simple as it is actually
not at this point. Not at this point. So, Alex.
So it's one thing that I would really like to make clear, and I don't think we should conflate how we get to shared counters, the Redis stuff, blah, 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 and so forth, right? So we talked about this, we talked about memory, but this, like, for instance, there's a new option right now in Limitador that's not exposed to the operator for the memory take, which is how much memory should it try to use for caching qualified counters, right? So there used to be memory leaks, so we fixed that, but then there is this question of, and there is this issue that talks about that, right? How do we deal with caching memory consumption and so forth? So there are more aspects, I think, for disk, obviously the PV and so forth. So there are more aspects to the deployment of the service that I could see somebody wanting to tweak that is unrelated to shared counters or whatever. Certainly in the case of Limitador, which is the one that I guess I know the best. So today, Kuadrant effectively applies a template for what it will consider as what people would want to use for Limitador deployment and Authorino deployment, right? We sort of heuristics, and until those heuristics turn out to be wrong, let's say that's what you'll get. So now you end up in a situation where you need to tweak that. So if I use that thinking, like people could go to their cluster and do see the Limitador deployment CR. I know it doesn't exist, but let's say, or the Authorino, right? Let's say they see that, they go to the Authorino doc and they see, oh yeah, that's configured this way, but based on my use case, that's not working, so I need to tweak that thing. So how do I tweak that? Because I don't own that thing, but it's Quadrants. So all that to say that I'm actually thinking that what you have there, I guess, is actually not that bad per se. I actually think it is the natural way to evolve to that state where like, okay, oh, I have that deployment and that's what I need to change. That is controlled by the Authorino CR. So that's the one that I would need to change. How do I make that rather than all the hacks that we use? Like a thing that I can change and will then behave nicely, I guess. And so I guess the two options are indeed either we like embed that part inside the Kuadrant CR, or we make it point to the one so that you could say, oh, that's the one. You just dump it, you change it, and now you have yours. You name it, and you have it point from the Kuadrant CR back to the limitador or Authorino case. So in the case of limitador, as you pointed out, the two things are, as of now, for sure, like conflated. So the runtime behavior is within the limitador thing. I'm going to be honest, I don't remember what the rationale was. I remember there was one, and maybe we were wrong and we missed something. So anyways, that's a mouthful, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that from a user perspective, keeping this thing as an easy way to get started, see stuff, and then, oh, I want to persist my counters on disk because I'm restarting my limitador every other weekend just because I think it's fun, right? How do I achieve that? The lower we bring the bar for somebody to be able to achieve that, I think the better it is. So yeah, and I guess for now, things where maybe you can only point it to one where there are no limits defined in it could be a way, but as you pointed out, people could add it later and blah, blah, blah. So there are still issues with that as well. So I'm not really sure where I'm all heading with that. But yeah, if anything, like the story on how somebody installs Kuadrant and then moves to this more complex use case, I think is more interesting than how do I get a multi-cluster shared counter, because I think that one specifically comes with way more questions than actually, because this again blurs the line between what is the definition of a limit and then how do I make that a reality in the runtime that I have, right? So yeah, not sure I really helped anything by sharing my thoughts, but those were my thoughts.
Basically, again, I raised this topic because I had the feeling that I was missing something clear. I see that I'm not. Some people more or less misaligned in that. So how we should be doing this is another thing to discuss. But clearly, there are some issues with the current proposal. So things to be done from now on. I think for the limitador, I will support Jim on the proposal, giving my ideas, and I need to maybe we should merge his PR with his RFC with my own. Well, let's see how we deal with that. And then I need to elaborate more on the Authorino use case, which it's not straightforward as well, because both configs are being selected in in a specific way, and those labels could be changed. So there are things to be think about. But yeah, I think so. For the limitador case, I will go with Jim on this, and I need to elaborate more on the authoring. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, Alex.
Thinking out loud again, but how about we made this template thing like a first class citizen, meaning that effectively whatever, yeah, we need to reflect, I guess, in the status. Well, maybe not. I was thinking, that it actually becomes part of the CR, right? I guess it is what Jim's proposing. And then, you have the template thing, and which is what Kuadrant will use by default, effectively. And then lets you tweak it inside that CR just as much.
yeah, there is a duplication there, but yeah, I think it's yeah. So that's it. Thanks for the feedback. Yeah, Craig, back to you. I don't know. There are more.
Okay, thanks, Agusti. I think maybe working with Jim and merging. But have we got what the process is for that? Yeah, are you going to like maybe go for? I don't want to go down a massive rabbit hole here. Like superseded by or something like that, and linked to the new RFC maybe or something like that. Just to point at something else. Anyway.
The thing is that the RFC should cover both, and as far as I know, Jim's RFC only covers the other limitador one. So maybe.
But
well, anyway,
being consistent, I think, would be desirable on the approach. I think it would be fairly easily feasible to embed the Authorino CR effectively in the Kuadrant one, right? Just as much as we would do with the partial limitador CR.
but for Authorino, there is no need to have a template for the deployment. For Authorino, I think we can use a shared instance because Kuadrant can manage its own configuration bit, the auth config or set of auth configs.
Yeah, I get that from a technical perspective, but why would you use two different ways of tweaking the deployment based on the operand, which really doesn't matter too much, right? From a user perspective, I mean.
Well, only because it's allowed. I mean, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's again. I mean, the Authorino per se doesn't take too much resources, so why not deploy its own Authorino and get some deployment template like in limitador? Why not? Yeah, sure.
I think it makes sense to me given how lightweight these are. I think my only question would be if you have a controller like Authorino, like generally those are global. I know Authorino can be like namespaced, right? So it can be looking only at a single namespace. The problem that I've seen with having multiple instances of a controller on a single cluster is when they don't all upgrade at the same time, and you end up with different versions. There's only one CRD, and the CRD is global, right? So, you know, that's like the contention point for the different instances of the controller, because if you have version 1 of a controller and version 2 of a controller, but version 1 of a CRD, one of them is going to blow up, right? So
I have my own answer, but there are people waiting for that.
Yeah.
So I think Guy was first before Peter, if I'm not wrong.
Thanks, Agusti. Totally agree with the single version of the CRD across the entire cluster, Craig. Just to point out that Authorino, you're right, it does have the namespaced mode that it can be deployed in contrast to the cluster-wide, but we kind of have something in the middle between those two modes of deployment, which is the cluster-wide or even the namespaced, but filtered to a particular label selector, meaning that one Authorino can watch only a subset of the alt configs. And you can have more instances of Authorino, even both cluster-wide, but completely separate and one from each other.
So would it be, sorry, Peter, I'm kind of confused. I just want to say this one thing here. So would it be reasonable to say that you have a single instance of the Kuadrant operator, and we don't have multiple instances of that? So when you upgrade the Kuadrant operator, you also upgrade all of the instances of Authorino by default at that point.
Yes and no, because Kuadrant delegates everything on limitador, an Authorino operator. The Authorino operator is the one giving the CRD for Authorino, the version.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Exactly.
So when you install, when you upgrade the Kuadrant operator, it will upgrade to the version of the Authorino operator.
Yes,
And that will
exactly.
okay. So the cluster should remain consistent. That's the thing I was trying to
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Sorry, one sentence, and I give the word to Peter. For me, Authorino, even though it's a controller, it's in the service in the data plane. So for me, it makes total sense to have multiple instances of Authorino only because of the workloads. Some tenant may have its own workload, and some tenant might need its own Authorino instance. Some other tenant may need its own other Authorino.
I'm much more comfortable with it now that we talk about the idea that basically you install a single version of Kuadrant.
Yes,
and not end up with like multiple versions of Kuadrant on the same cluster. Okay.
Peter.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think everything was said before me. I will only add that yes, Autorino is easily deployable with the label selector. We actually tested with that, and yeah, we haven't yet encountered any problems. The only problems that sometimes happen, at least in the past, is when two Autorinos try to do the same config, but either it was removed first. First, I think it was fixed. Second, it should not happen in the first place because that's a mixed misconfiguration. So yeah, multiple Autorinos on a cluster, perfectly safe.
That's an interesting one with if you misconfigure, like you're obviously going to get weirdness there, right? So do we actually handle that, or does it just like we create some kind of lock on the CR instance, or how do we handle that situation? It just blows up.
As of today, it just blows up.
Okay. I mean, it's an edge case, right? But it would be it might be a fun one to try and figure out what the heck was going on. Okay. Are we done there, Agoski? Are you happy enough with? Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, we only have 2 minutes. Thomas and Dave, is this something we can maybe talk about in 2 minutes, or?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, go for it.
Just was discussing with David, like just given we're a small team, we joined the Kubernetes Slack space. We have our own Slack space. We have the Red Hat Slack space. It's too much noise compared to the team size that we have and the product size that we have. And we kind of agreed, and I checked with some people, and everybody seems to agree that it kind of makes sense at this moment to just go with the Kubernetes Slack channel, and then with as an upside also that that my side of the team also starts talking there more, so there's more togetherness there, and just close the one that we set up in the Kuadrant Slack workspace. And maybe one day we're too big for that little channel in Kubernetes, and we decide to start it again. We'll see. But like for now, I think we should just keep things simple. And so my question is, or our question is, anybody thinks that's not a good decision? Please speak up or be silent forever.
All right.
Wow, that was quick.
Huh? Sorry, I muted everybody just before. Okay, excellent. That was right on time, Thomas. So everybody have a good evening, and we'll talk to you soon.
Ciao.
Thank you. Cheers.
Yes.
Bye.